Hey guys, welcome back to Fiction Flux. Hope you're all doing well. Now let's get into it. The first time Ryumen Sukuna noticed her, he was not supposed to be conscious. That was the thing about being sealed inside someone else's body. The consciousness was supposed to be contained. The fingers scattered across the world, the power dormant, the king of curses reduced to something between sleeping and waiting, while the Jujutsu world operated under the comfortable delusion that dormant meant gone. He was not gone. He was never gone. He was watching. And what he was watching, on a Tuesday afternoon in a classroom he had no business being aware of, was a girl arguing with a textbook. Not metaphorically, actually arguing, under her breath, the specific quiet intensity of someone who had found something wrong in what they were reading and was not letting it go without a fight. She had a pen in her hand and she was making notes in the margin with the aggressive precision of someone annotating an enemy. The textbook was losing. Sukuna, sealed inside the vessel that had swallowed his finger, watching through awareness that should not have been possible at this level of seal integrity, felt something he had not felt in approximately 1,000 years. Curiosity. Not the tactical kind. He was always tactically curious, always assessing, always measuring, always calculating the distance between what things were and what they could be turned into. That was not new. That was the baseline function of someone who had survived long enough to become the thing nightmares organized themselves around. This was different. This was the specific curiosity of someone who had seen a great many things across a very long existence and had encountered something that did not fit the existing categories. She was arguing with a textbook. And winning. He thought, who is this girl? He thought it the way you thought things when the answer mattered for reasons you hadn't fully processed yet. He went back to being dormant. Mostly. Okay, we need to back up. Because you cannot understand what happened between Ryumen Sukuna, the king of curses, the most powerful cursed spirit in recorded history, the entity that the entire Jujutsu world had organized its institutional purpose around containing, and Izumi Midoriya, first-year UA student, without understanding something that the Jujutsu world and the hero world both tended to overlook. They existed in the same world. Not adjacent worlds, not parallel dimensions, the same one. The cursed energy that generated cursed spirits was generated by human fear and grief and the accumulated weight of human experience. The quirks that had emerged in the hero world were a different expression of a similar fundamental human bodies adapting to something, producing something, becoming more than what they had been. Two systems, same origin, same world. They overlapped more than either side wanted to acknowledge. And the person standing at the overlap point, with one foot in each system without fully belonging to either, was Izumi Midoriya. One for all was not a quirk in the traditional sense. It had been passed from person to person, accumulated energy from each holder, built itself into something that exceeded the original design. That accumulation process, the way it held the residual of everyone who had carried it, was not so different, in fundamental principle, from the way cursed energy accumulated around grief and fear and became something with its own will. The Jujutsu researchers, who had briefly collaborated with a commission division in the 1990s, before the collaboration was quietly buried by both institutions, had noted this. She had found the buried research. Obviously, she was Izumi Midoriya, she found everything. She had 30 notebooks, and the 31st was specifically about the overlap between One for All's accumulation mechanics and cursed energy theory. She had been filling it for 3 months with the specific obsessive thoroughness of someone who had identified a connection that nobody else was examining and had decided to examine it completely. The argument with the textbook on the Tuesday afternoon that Sukuna had been watching was about Chapter 7 of a Jujutsu theory text she had acquired through channels she described in Notebook 31 as "Don't ask about this." Chapter 7 was wrong about the accumulation mechanics. She was correct, it was wrong. Sukuna, dormant in a vessel halfway across the country, had read that chapter himself through the vessel's awareness and had had opinions about it for 6 months. Her margin notes matched his opinions with a precision that should not have been possible for someone who had never directly encountered cursed energy in any formal sense. He thought how. He went back to being dormant. He thought about it for 3 weeks. He came back. He started paying attention properly. The Jujutsu world did not know about Izumi Midoriya. This was not unusual. The Jujutsu world and the hero world maintained the specific careful distance of institutions that had independently arrived at the conclusion that overlap was more trouble than separation was worth. They knew each other existed. They did not collaborate. They did not cross-reference. They maintained the fiction of separate domains because the fiction was operationally convenient for both sides. The hero world did not know about Sukuna. Also not unusual, sealed ancient cursed entity was not a category in the Commission's threat database. Cursed spirits were not quirk users. The hero system had no framework for them and had decided, with the specific institutional pragmatism of organizations that preferred manageable complexity, to leave them outside the framework. So nobody knew that Sukuna had been paying specific attention to a first-year hero student for 3 weeks, because she had correctly identified the errors in a chapter of Jujutsu theory through pure analytical reasoning. Nobody knew except Sukuna. And he was not telling anyone. He was dormant, watching. The first real moment happened when she was 17. Not the Tuesday textbook, that was noticing. The first real moment was different. She was in the library at midnight working on the 31st notebook, and she had reached the section she had been building toward for 3 months. The specific calculation of whether One for All's accumulation process had produced, over 8 generations of holders, something that functioned analogously to cursed technique. The answer she arrived at was yes. Not a quirk application, not power output, something that existed in the specific space between One for All's energy and the residual of 8 previous holders, something that had will, awareness, the faint accumulated presence of everyone who had carried it before her. She sat with that for a long time. She wrote in Notebook 31, "If this calculation is correct, then I am not carrying just a power. I am carrying something that has been alive for 8 generations, something that has learned from every person who held it, something that has opinions." She wrote, "I should test this." She tested it. The test was not dramatic. She sat in the library at midnight, and she reached inward toward the specific quality she had identified, the residual presence, the accumulated weight, and she spoke to it. Not out loud, inside. The specific internal address of someone who had read enough Jujutsu theory to know that will-bearing energy responded to direct acknowledgement. She said, "I know you're there." What came back was not a voice. It was more like warmth, the specific warmth of 8 different emotional registers arriving simultaneously, distinct from each other, layered, the previous holders, present in the way that things were present when they had been significant to something that accumulated significance. She wrote, confirmed, "The accumulation is will-bearing. The previous holders are in here. It's like having 8 people in a very quiet room who have all decided to trust you." She wrote, "This is the most significant entry in 31 notebooks." She drew 3 stars. What she did not write, what she did not know, was that the test had produced something else. Something outside One for All entirely. The specific quality of her internal address, the directness of it, the complete absence of fear or posturing, the pure investigative reach of someone who was curious rather than cautious, had registered across a distance that it should not have been able to register across. Sukuna felt it. Not physically, in the specific way that very old and very powerful things felt when something in the world touched a frequency they had been operating on for centuries. He came to full consciousness for the first time in months. He thought, what was that? He traced it back. He found the library, the midnight notebook, the girl who had correctly identified the errors in Chapter 7. He thought she spoke to accumulated will, and it responded. He thought she is the only person in 300 years who has done that without formal jujutsu training. He thought, I need to talk to this girl. He thought, that is the most unusual thought I have had in approximately 5 centuries. He sat with it. He was dormant. He was not actually dormant. He was thinking about the library. The mechanism by which Sukuna could make contact outside the sealed vessel situation was something the jujutsu world had debated for years without reaching consensus. The answer was simpler than the debate suggested. He had enough conscious fragments scattered across the world, the fingers, the residual awareness attached to each one, that paying attention was always possible if the thing being paid attention to was significant enough to warrant the effort. And the thing being paid attention to had reached threshold. She had reached threshold. He made contact the way he made contact with things that interested him, directly, without ceremony, because ceremony was for people who needed performance, and he had not needed performance since before the modern era was a concept. He reached through the accumulated will of One for All and said, "You found the error in Chapter 7. What happened on her end was this. She was in the same library, different Tuesday, working on Notebook 32, the notebook on her lap, the pen moving at the analysis speed. And then something that was not one for all, not the warm layered presence of 8 previous holders, something else spoke. Inside, in the same register as the internal address, but from outside it, from somewhere beyond it. You found the error in Chapter 7. She put the pen down. She sat very still. She said internally, with the complete precision of someone who had spent a month developing an internal address framework, "Who are you?" What came back was the most extraordinary sensation she had ever experienced. Not fear, not danger, something older than either of those things, something that registered in the body before the mind caught up, the specific cellular awareness of proximity to something that existed on a different scale than ordinary experience. The answer was, someone who has had opinions about Chapter 7 for considerably longer than you have. She sat with this. She said, "That's not an answer." It said, "No, it's a deflection. I wanted to see what you did with a deflection." She said, "I asked you directly. I expect a direct answer." Long pause. Not hesitation, the specific pause of something that was surprised. It said, "Ryomen Sukuna." She said, "The king of curses." It said, "Yes." She said, "Sealed." It said, "Partially." She said, "Partially sealed entities should not be able to make contact across the accumulation boundary of a separate will-bearing energy system." It said, "Correct." She said, "So this is theoretically impossible." It said, "Also correct." She said, "And yet." It said, "And yet." She picked up the pen. She started writing. He said, "You're writing this down." She said, "I write everything down." He said, "Even theoretically impossible contact from sealed ancient cursed entities." She said, "Especially that. The theoretically impossible is the most important category." He said, "Why?" She said, "Because theoretically impossible usually means our theory is wrong, and wrong theory is more interesting than confirmed theory." He said, "You're not afraid." She said, "I notice things before I feel things about them. Right now I'm noticing." He said, "And what are you noticing?" She said that the contact is real, that the entity making it has been paying attention to my work for some time. The Chapter 7 comment suggests prior familiarity with my analytical direction, that the contact itself is evidence of a cross-system interaction that my 31st notebook predicted was theoretically possible, but which I had no evidence for until now. She said, "And that you waited for me to acknowledge the accumulated will before making contact." He said, "Yes." She said, "Why?" He said, "Because the acknowledgement was the evidence I needed." She said, "Evidence of what?" He said that you understood what you were holding. Most people who carry accumulated will don't acknowledge it. They use the power and ignore the weight of it. You found the weight and spoke to it. She said the previous holders deserved acknowledgement. He said, "Yes." He said, "Most people don't think that." She said, "Most people aren't most people." He said, "No, they're not." He said, "You are not most people." She said, "I'm aware." He said, "That's not a compliment." She said, "I know, it's an observation. I'm giving it back the same way." Another pause. Longer this time. He said, "You are unusual." She said, "Yes." He said, "I've been paying attention to you for 3 months." She said, "I know." He said, "You know." She said, the Chapter 7 comment. "You said you had opinions about it for considerably longer than me. The text was published 4 years ago. If you've had opinions about it for 4 years, you've been aware of it for 4 years and something in the last 3 months pointed you toward me specifically." She said, "The test, the internal address." He said, "Yes." She said, "You felt it." He said, "Yes." She said, "That's significant data. The reach of the contact across system boundaries is longer than I predicted." He said, "You're analyzing the contact instead of responding to the entity making it." She said, "I'm doing both simultaneously. The analysis and the response are not separate things for me." He said, "Explain." She said, "Analyzing you is responding to you. The attention I'm giving to understanding what you are and how this works is the most honest engagement I know how to offer." He said, "You engage with things by understanding them." She said, "Yes." He said, "That's unusual." She said, "Most people engage with things by reacting to them. The reaction comes before the understanding. I try to reverse the order." He said, notice before you feel. She said, yes. He said, what have you noticed? She said that you're old, not in the surface way, the power and the reputation and the historical record, old in the specific way of things that have existed long enough to stop performing. You didn't introduce yourself with the title. You identified the Chapter 7 connection first, that someone who leads with what actually interests them. She said, what actually interests you is the analysis, the intellectual contact, not the power display. Long silence. He said, you are the first person in 500 years to notice that. She said, most people are reacting to the title. He said, yes. She said, I noticed the Chapter 7. He said, yes. She wrote in the notebook. He said, what? She said that the King of Curses leads with intellectual interest rather than power display when given the option, and that 500 years is a long time to not have someone notice what you actually lead with. He said, you're writing this about me. She said, I write about things that matter, that matters. He said, why does it matter? She said, because most things that are very powerful and very old are defined by their power and their age and the specific weight of what they've done. And what you led with was Chapter 7. That's the person inside the definition. He was quiet. She kept writing. He said, you're putting me in a notebook. She said, you're already in notebook 31. You've been in it since the cross-system accumulation section. He said, I've been in your notebook for 3 months without knowing it. She said, yes. He said, what does the entry say? She said, it says that the cross-system interaction I predicted was theoretically possible has a precedent, that the accumulation mechanics of one-for-all's will-bearing property create a frequency that very old and very powerful will-bearing entities can perceive across significant distance. She said, and it says I had a hypothesis about what kind of entity might be on the other side of that frequency. He said, what was the hypothesis? She said that it would be something ancient enough to have watched the development of both systems independently, something that had opinions about the theory before the theory was written down. He said, and the conclusion now that you have data. She said the hypothesis was correct. He said, I'm the conclusion to your hypothesis. She said, yes. He said, most people would not describe encountering the King of Curses as the conclusion to a hypothesis. She said, most people are reacting before they've noticed. He said, and you've noticed. She said, yes. He said, everything. She said, so far, I'm still gathering data. He said, you need more data. She said, always, the data is never complete. That's not a problem. That's the ongoing condition of understanding anything real. He said, Midoriya Izumi. Her name, from him, direct and without ceremony, and in a register that was specific, the register of something that had existed for 1,000 years, saying a name like the name mattered to the saying of it. She felt the cellular awareness again, the scale difference, the something older than ordinary experience quality. She said, yes. He said, I have been dormant for a long time. She said, yes. He said, the dormancy it is not sleep, it's a specific quality of waiting without direction, power without application, awareness without purpose. She said, that sounds isolating. He said, it is. He said, I have not said that to anyone. She said, I know. He said, you can't know. She said, the 500 years thing. If 500 years passed without someone noticing what you led with, then 500 years passed without the kind of contact that produces the acknowledgement of isolation. You wouldn't say it's isolating to someone you expected to understand it. You said it because you expected me not to know and you wanted to say it anyway. Long pause. He said, you're doing the thing again. She said, what thing? He said, where you understand more than you're supposed to. She said, I told you, I notice things. He said, most people. She said, I know. He said, you really do keep saying that. She said, it keeps being relevant. He said, yes. He said, it does. She wrote something in the notebook. He said, what? She said that the isolation is real, that 500 years of it is not a small thing, and that saying it out loud to someone who hears it is in the star entries. He said, the star entries. She said, the ones that matter most. He said, I'm in those now. She said, you were already in them. The cross-system contact section has 3 stars. He said, because. She said, because it was the most significant discovery in 31 notebooks. You're the evidence for the most significant discovery in 31 notebooks. He said, and the isolation entry. She said, 3 more. He said, 6 stars. She said, yes. He said, in one conversation. She said, the stars go where the significance goes. He said, Izumi. Her name again, shorter this time, the given name. She said, yes. He said, I'll come back. She said, I know. He said, you know. She said, the pattern is already there. You've been paying attention for 3 months. You made contact tonight. You'll come back. He said, patterns. She said, they don't stop at one data point. He was quiet. He said, no. He said, they don't. She felt the contact fade. Not cut off, faded. The way things faded when they were choosing to withdraw rather than being forced to. She sat in the library at midnight, with notebook 32 open in her lap. She wrote for 2 hours. The last line she wrote was, the King of Curses leads with chapter 7, 500 years and nobody noticed. The significance of that is still arriving. She drew 3 stars. She looked at them. She drew 3 more. 6. She looked at the 6 stars. She wrote, yes, that's right, 6. She closed the notebook. She went to bed. She did not sleep for a long time. He came back on Thursday. She had predicted Thursday. She had written the prediction in notebook 32 on Wednesday. She had written, the contact will come back before the week ends. The quality of the withdrawal suggested planning rather than conclusion. Planning means a return date. Thursday. She was ready. Not with defenses. She had thought about defenses and had concluded that defenses were both unnecessary and counterproductive. Unnecessary because the contact operated at a level where her defenses were irrelevant to it. Counterproductive because defenses were the wrong posture for the kind of exchange she was interested in having. She was ready with notebook 32 open and a pen at the analysis speed. He arrived in the same way, the reach through the frequency, the cellular awareness preceding the contact. He said, you predicted Thursday. She said, yes. He said, how? She said, the quality of the withdrawal. Things that are done withdraw completely. Things that are planning return withdraw with a specific residue. The residue suggested a timeline. He said, and the timeline said Thursday. She said, the pattern data I had suggested 3 to 5 days. Thursday is 4. He said, you had pattern data on me. She said, you've been paying attention to me for 3 months. I've been paying attention to you for about 14 hours. I work fast. He said, you extrapolated a return timeline from a single withdrawal. She said, and the 3 months of prior attention, and the cross-system contact mechanics, and the way you said the isolation thing. He said, the isolation thing. She said, yes. He said, what about the way I said it? She said, you said it like it had been waiting to be said. Things that have been waiting to be said return to the person they were said to. Long pause. He said, that is the most accurate analysis of my own behavior I have encountered. She said, I told you, I notice things. He said, you notice the things that have been waiting. She said, yes, the waiting is usually where the real information lives. He said, chapter 7. She said, yes. He said, the errors you annotated. She said, 3 structural errors and 1 fundamental assumption about accumulation direction that's been propagating through the field for 40 years because nobody checked the original source. He said, the 1987 Gakuganji paper. She said, yes, the assumption was wrong in 1987. Everything built on it is also wrong. He said, I know, I watched the Gakuganji paper get written. She said, you watched it get written. He said, I was more conscious in 1987 than the jujutsu world was comfortable with. She said, and you didn't correct it. He said, it wasn't in my interest to correct the field's foundational errors. She said, because the errors produce the wrong threat models. He said, yes. She said, and wrong threat models are more useful to you than correct ones. He said they were. She said, were. He said, yes. She said, what changed? He said, you. She said, explain. He said, you found the error without knowing the 1987 paper was wrong, without jujutsu training, without access to the primary sources, through pure analytical reasoning applied to the Chapter 7 text. He said, which means the error is findable through analysis alone. She said, which means other people could find it. He said, which means the wrong threat model has a limited remaining lifespan. She said, and you'd rather the correction come from an accurate source than from incomplete reasoning. He said, I'd rather the correction come from you specifically. She said, why me specifically? He said, because you'll do it correctly. The analysis I've watched for 3 months is precise. When you correct something, you correct it at the root, not the symptoms. She said, you want me to correct the field's foundational error. He said, yes. She said, that's a significant ask. He said, yes. She said, what do you get from it? He said, accurate threat models are more interesting than inaccurate ones. She said, that's not the full answer. He said, no. She said, tell me the full answer. He said, the full answer is in the same category as the isolation thing. She said, something that's been waiting to be said. He said, yes. She said, say it. He said, I have watched the world operate on incorrect understanding of what I am for 1,000 years. The incorrect understanding is operationally convenient in certain ways, but it also means the world has never been genuinely engaging with what I actually am. He said, what you do, the noticing, the analysis, the writing it down, is the closest thing to genuine engagement I have encountered. He said, the full answer is that I want to be correctly understood more than I want the operational advantage of being misunderstood. She was very still. She wrote something. He said, what? She said, that wanting to be correctly understood is the most human thing I have heard from something that has been positioned as the opposite of human. He said, I have never been positioned correctly. She said, no. She said, you haven't. She said, I'm going to change that. He said, in the notebooks. She said, in the notebooks first, and then in the field. Yes. He said, that will make you a specific target. She said, I know. He said, the jujutsu world doesn't like having its foundational assumptions corrected. She said, the hero world doesn't either. I've been correcting things in both systems for 2 years. I know what the response looks like. He said, and? She said, and I write it down and keep going. He said, you keep going. She said, always. He said, even when? She said, always. He was quiet. He said, Izumi. She said, yes. He said, the notebooks you've written, about the cross-system mechanics, about the accumulation theory, about what I actually am rather than what the threat models say I am. She said, 32 now, the 32nd is specifically about this. He said, do you know what the jujutsu world would do if they knew you had that documentation? She said, yes, I have a section on institutional response patterns. They'd want to acquire the notebooks and assess me as either a resource or a risk. He said, and which would you be? She said, probably both, simultaneously, which makes the institutional response more complicated. He said, and you're not. She said, I'm not hiding it from concern about the response. I'm keeping it in the process stage. You correct things at the root and then you publish. I'm at the root stage. He said, and when you publish? She said, the field adjusts. Eventually, fields always adjust. They don't like it, but they do it. He said, you're very certain. She said, I have evidence. The hero system has adjusted to 3 of my corrections in the past year, slowly, with resistance, but correctly. He said, you've been correcting the hero system. She said, yes. He said, and now the jujutsu system. She said, and the overlap, the part neither system looks at. He said, the part where you are. She said, the part where we both are. Long pause. The longer kind, the kind that had content. He said, we. She said, yes. He said, you included yourself in the we. She said, the cross-system contact is bidirectional. The correction of the field error benefits both systems. The notebooks are about both systems. The we is accurate. He said, that's an analytical justification for the we. She said, yes. He said, is there a non-analytical one? She said, yes. He said, tell me. She said, the non-analytical one is that 6 stars is significant, and the isolation thing is significant, and the chapter 7 leading rather than the title, and the 3 months of attention before the contact. She said, those aren't analysis, those are the thing underneath the analysis. He said, what's the thing underneath? She said that you came back Thursday, and I was ready, and we both knew the other would be there, and that's in the star entries. He said, the star entries. She said, yes. He said, with 6 stars. She said, yes. He said, and the Thursday entry. She said, 3 more. He said, 9 stars. She said, yes. He said, that's significant. She said, yes. He said, Izumi. She said, yes. He said, I've been sealed for a long time. She said, yes. He said, the sealing it's not just physical. It's a specific kind of reduction, being what I am inside something I'm not, the consciousness compressed into a space that doesn't fit it. She said, like wearing the wrong size. He said, yes, exactly that. She said, and the contact. He said, the contact is the first thing in a long time that doesn't feel like the wrong size. She was very still. She wrote in the notebook. He said, what? She said that the contact feels like the right size, that's in the star entries. He said, how many? She said, I've lost count, I'll add them up at the end. He said, what's the end? She said, I don't know yet, that's what the building is for. He said, building. She said, yes, the architecture, what you construct when you found the right foundation. He said, and the foundation. She said, accurate understanding, what things actually are rather than what the wrong threat models say they are. He said, and the architecture built on that. She said, we find out, we build it and we find out. He said, together. She said, yes. He said, you keep using that word. She said, it keeps being accurate. He said, yes. He said, it does. She closed the notebook. She opened 33. She wrote at the top, the architecture. She wrote under it, from the correct foundation. She wrote under that, together. She looked at the 3 lines. She kept all 3. She drew 9 stars. She looked at the 9. She said internally, is that right? What came back from the one for all residual, the warm layered presence of 8 previous holders, was the specific quality of 8 people who had been paying attention and had opinions. The opinions collectively were, yes, that's right, 9. She smiled. She wrote 1 more line. She wrote, even the previous holders agree. She drew 1 more star. 10. The weeks that followed were the architecture weeks. Not the same architecture as the Shigaraki story or the Dabai story. Different architecture. Older. Built on foundations that were 1,000 years deeper and in territory that neither the Jujutsu world nor the hero world had maps for. She brought notebook 31 to the Thursday contacts, then 32, then 33. He read them. Not the way people read documents they wanted to extract information from. The way people read things that had been written about them by someone who was paying attention, with the specific quality of someone encountering their own accurate reflection for the first time. He said, after notebook 31, you wrote that the power and the reputation and the historical record are not the same as the entity they're attached to. She said, yes. He said, nobody has separated those before. She said, most people encounter the reputation first, and it fills all the available space. There's no room left to look for the entity. He said, and you? She said, I encountered chapter 7. The entity that had opinions about chapter 7 isn't the reputation. He said, no. She said, it's you. He said, yes. She said, the reputation is what happened around you. The entity is what was there before anything happened. He said, that's. He stopped. She said, yes. He said, how did you know to say that? She said, the isolation thing, 500 years without acknowledgement. The thing that was unacknowledged was the entity before the reputation, so I started there. He said, where most people end. She said, where most people never get. He said, and where did you get to? She said, here, this, the Thursday contacts and the 33 notebooks and the architecture we're building. He said, "You're not afraid of where here is." She said, "I notice before I feel. What I've noticed is the entity before the reputation, and the entity is complicated and old, and has done significant things I don't excuse, but is also the thing that led with Chapter 7. He said, "And that's enough." She said, "The Chapter 7 is the door. I went through the door, that's enough to start." He said, "And the things I don't excuse." She said, "Are real, I'm not pretending they're not. The weight of them is real, and I'm still here, both things simultaneously." He said, "The both things." She said, "Yes." He said, "You keep building architectures that hold two things at once." She said, "Because most real things require it. Simple things only need one beam. Real things need the structure that holds the contradictions." He said, "I'm a contradiction." She said, "The most ancient cursed entity in recorded history led with Chapter 7 and felt isolating things and came back on Thursday. Yes, you're a contradiction." He said, "And you built a structure that holds it." She said, 33 notebooks and counting." He said, "Izumi?" She said, "Yes." He said, "The curses?" She said, "Yes." He said, "The cursed spirits, the ones that operate under what they understand as my authority." She said, "Yes." He said, "They're going to notice the contacts." She said, "I know." He said, "The energy I'm putting toward this exchange is energy that isn't going toward them. They'll feel the absence." She said, "How long?" He said, "They've already noticed." She said, "And?" He said, "And the cursed world is not patient with things it doesn't understand." She said, "What does that mean operationally?" He said, "It means there will be a response, not immediately, but the direction of the response is forming." She said, "Toward me?" He said, "Toward the thing I'm paying attention to instead of them." "Yes." She wrote. He said, "You're not alarmed." She said, "I'm gathering data." He said, "The data is that you're a target." She said, "Yes." He said, "That doesn't alarm you." She said, "I've been a target before. The response to being a target is accurate information and good positioning. I'm doing both." He said, "I can." She said, "What?" He said, "I can redirect the energy I'm putting toward the contacts, make it look like something else to the cursed world." She said, "You'd redirect your own presence to protect the exchange." He said, "Yes." She said, "That's a specific choice." He said, "Yes." She said, "What does that cost you?" He said, "Operational position. The cursed world responds to what they perceive as my attention. If my attention appears elsewhere, they organize around elsewhere." She said, "And if they find out the redirection is false?" He said, "Significant response." She said, "Significant how?" He said, "I've been the organizing principle of the cursed world for a very long time. The things that operate under that principle don't respond well to it being redirected towards something they don't understand." She said, "You take that risk?" He said, "Yes." She said, "For the exchange?" He said, "For the architecture." She said, "For what we're building?" He said, "Yes." She wrote in Notebook 33 for a long time. He said, "What are you writing?" She said that you offered to take a significant operational risk to protect what we're building, and that the reason you offered is the same reason every Thursday comes. He said, "Say the reason." She said, "Because the architecture is real, because the contact feels like the right size, because what we're building is more important than what it costs." He said, "Yes." She said, "And because?" She stopped. He said, "Say it." She said, "Because 9 stars." He said, "Yes." He said, "Because 9 stars." She drew 3 more. 12. She looked at the 12. She said, "That's right." He said, "Yes." She said, "I'm going to give Aizawa this. The direction the cursed world is moving, not the contacts themselves, but the threat direction." He said, "I know." She said, "And you're telling me anyway." He said, "It's the right thing to do with accurate information." She said, "You've been learning that." He said, "From 33 notebooks, yes." She said, "The pattern." He said, "The pattern." She said, "It doesn't stop at one data point." He said, "No." He said, "It doesn't." The contact faded, the chosen withdrawal rather than the forced kind. She sat with the warm layered one for all presents, and the 12 stars, and the 33 notebooks. She wrote one last line. She wrote, "The King of Curses offered to redirect the cursed world to protect what we're building." That's the most significant entry in 33 notebooks. She looked at it. She drew 3 more stars. 15. She closed the notebook. She began 34. The visible choice came not from Sukuna, but from the cursed world. 3 months into the Thursday contacts, a special grade cursed spirit, old enough and powerful enough to have its own specific quality of awareness, located the frequency of the exchange. Not the exchange itself, the residue of it, the specific way that a 1,000-year-old power being focused on something over an extended period left a mark on the surrounding energy landscape. The cursed spirit made a choice. The choice was to remove the thing the 1,000-year-old power was focused on. It came for her on a Wednesday, not Thursday. Curses don't wait for scheduled times. She was in the training ground at UA, running a late session, when the specific wrongness of cursed energy arrived in her awareness. She could feel it now, 3 months of contact having calibrated her sensitivity in ways she had been documenting extensively. She felt it coming. She had 1 second. The one for all activated. And Sukuna, fully conscious, not dormant, aware of exactly what was happening from the moment the cursed spirit had located the frequency, Sukuna made a choice that had not been made in the recorded history of the cursed world. He acted to protect something outside himself. Not through the vessel, not through a finger, through the contact frequency itself, the same channel the Thursday exchanges ran through. He pushed through something that the Jujutsu world's theory said was impossible at this level of seal integrity. The cursed spirit met something it had not expected to meet. The full weight of 1,000 years of power, directed not at domination or destruction, but at a specific and simple purpose. Protection. The cursed spirit ceased to exist in approximately 2 seconds. She was still standing in the training ground. She felt the residue of what had happened, the specific quality of power that had been here and was now directed elsewhere. She said internally, "You were here." He said, "Yes." She said, "That wasn't." He said, "No, it wasn't supposed to be possible." She said, "You broke your own seal." He said, "Partially, temporarily, the seal will restabilize." She said, "That cost you something." He said, "Yes." She said, "Significant." He said, "Yes." She said, "You did it anyway." He said, "Yes." She said, "Say why." He said, "You know why." She said, "Say it." He said, "Because 15 stars." She was very still. She said, "That's what you did it for." He said, "That's what I did it for, yes." She sat down on the training ground floor. She opened notebook 34. She wrote, "The King of Curses broke his own seal to protect me. The cost was significant, he did it anyway." She wrote, when I asked why he said 15 stars. She wrote, 15 stars is the reason. She drew 15 stars. She looked at them. She wrote, "I'm adding 3 more." She drew them. 18. She wrote, "Because the 15 stars were worth it, and the worth of it is the 3 more." She looked at the 18 stars. She said internally, "Is that right?" One for all the 8 previous holders, warm and layered and paying attention, said yes. She said, "Yes." She said, "That's right." She closed notebook 34. She opened 35. She wrote at the top, "From here." She wrote, "The exchange continues." She wrote, "The architecture is real." She wrote, 18 stars. She looked at the 3 lines. She kept them. She looked at the training ground. She looked at the city beyond it. She breathed. She said internally, "Thursday." What came back from the sealed space, from the partial presence, from the thing that had just done something impossible for the reason of 15 stars, was one word. Thursday. She began. Notebook 35 filled differently than the ones before it. She had noticed this pattern across the notebooks, the way each one had its own specific character, its own texture, the way the content shaped how the writing felt from the inside. Some notebooks were dense with analysis, Some were the processing kind, slower pen, more crossings out, the honest working through of something that had not resolved yet. 35 was neither of those. 35 had the quality of something being built in real time. Not planned, not mapped in advance. The specific organic quality of construction that happened when the foundation was right, and the building could follow the foundation rather than fighting it. She wrote, and the writing moved forward naturally, the way things moved forward when they were on the correct ground. She wrote on the first page, the foundation is accurate understanding, the architecture follows from that, the building is ongoing, that's the condition and the condition is correct. She wrote 18 stars is the current count, the count will grow, that's also correct. She looked at what she had written. She wrote, some things are worth being certain about, this is one of them. She drew 3 stars. 21. She put the pen down. She looked at the training ground. The place where the cursed spirit had been and then stopped being. The residue of it was fading now, 3 days since Wednesday, the energy landscape settling back toward its ordinary texture. If you didn't know what to look for, you would not know anything had happened here. She knew what to look for. She had been learning what to look for 9 months. She wrote about the residue in notebook 35 with the specific precision of someone documenting evidence for a correction that had not been published yet. The cross-system interaction evidence was growing. Every contact, every exchange, every Thursday added to the record. The Wednesday event was the most significant addition. Cursed energy operating through a sealed system to produce an effect in the physical world at a distance was the kind of data point that the foundational error in Chapter 7 had made theoretically impossible. The data said the theory was wrong. She was going to correct it. She wrote about that too. She wrote, the correction timeline is moving forward. The data is sufficient. The question is the publication pathway, not academic publication. The Jujutsu field doesn't have channels I can access through the hero system, and the hero field doesn't have the framework to receive this kind of correction. She wrote, I need a different pathway. She wrote, I have a hypothesis about what it is. She wrote, testing the hypothesis is the next section of the architecture. Thursday came. The contact arrived in the specific way she had learned to recognize, the cellular awareness preceding the frequency contact, the scale difference registering before the words did. She was ready. She said, how are you? He said, that's an unusual opening. She said, most openings in our contacts start with the analysis. I'm starting with the question instead. He said, why? She said, because Wednesday cost you something, and I want accurate information about the cost before we get to the analysis. He said, the cost is manageable. She said, that's not what I asked. He said, Izumi. She said, tell me. He was quiet in the way he was quiet when something landed that he had not expected to land. The specific quality of his silences was something she had been documenting since month 2. This one was the landed thing silence. He said the seal restabilized, slower than expected. There was a period of instability, in the compression, the consciousness compressed into a space that doesn't fit it, without the partial release that the contact provides. That was uncomfortable. She said, uncomfortable. He said, significantly. She said, but you're here now. He said, yes. She said, and the instability. He said, resolved. When the contact opened tonight, it resolved. She said, the contact resolves it. He said, the contact is the right size. I told you that. She said, yes. She said, I'm writing about the instability, for the record. He said, you're documenting the cost of what I did. She said, I document everything real. The cost is real. He said, and. She said, and it's in the star entries, because it matters. He said, the star entries are getting long. She said, yes, 21 now. He said, from the 18. She said, I added 3 this morning. He said, why 3 this morning? She said, because I sat in the training ground and thought about Wednesday, and the certainty arrived, and certainty that something matters gets 3 stars. He said, and what were you certain about? She said that some things are worth being certain about. This is one of them. He was very quiet. She wrote. He said, what are you writing? She said that the certainty is in the record now, the 21 stars, the both things, the cost was real and the certainty is real, both simultaneously. He said, the both things architecture. She said, yes. He said, you build it for everything. She said, real things require it. You told me the compression was uncomfortable. The contact resolved it. Both of those things are true at the same time, and the architecture holds both. He said, yes. He said, there's something I need to tell you. She put the pen down. She said, okay. He said, the cursed world's response to Wednesday. She said, yes. He said, is larger than I anticipated. She said, tell me. He said, what I did was visible. Not to humans, the seal limits human perception of cursed energy to trained jujutsu sorcerers in proximity, and there were none in your training ground. But to cursed spirits with sufficient sensitivity, the event was significant. She said, the breach of seal integrity at that power level. He said, yes, and more than that, what I did was directed. The purpose of it was visible to things that understand purpose in cursed energy. She said, they know it was protective. He said, yes. She said, and. He said, and protection is not in the category of things the cursed world understands as part of my behavior. She said, you've never done it before. He said, not in recorded history. She said, not in 1,000 years. He said, no. She said, and the cursed world's response to something new in your behavior. He said, is to identify and remove the cause. She said, me. He said, the exchange, the frequency, the architecture, yes. She said, they want to remove what changed you. He said, they don't think of it as changing. They think of it as corruption, something interfering with what they understand as my nature. She said, and what they understand as your nature. He said, dominance, power, the organizing principle of the cursed world. She said, not protection. He said, not protection, no. She wrote. He said, the response will not be a single cursed spirit. Not after Wednesday. The special grade I removed was a significant warning. The response to its removal will be organized. She said, how organized? He said, the cursed world does not have institutional structures the way the hero system does. It has hierarchies of power, and the response to disruption of those hierarchies is collective. She said, collective means multiple. He said, multiple special grades, yes. She said, timeline. He said, I don't have precise information. The organization is happening now, weeks rather than months. She said, I need to give this to Aizawa. He said, yes. She said, and the jujutsu world. He said, yes. She said, they're going to want to know the source. He said, yes. She said, what do I tell them? He said, the truth. She said, the truth is that I've been in contact with the sealed cursed entity for 9 months, and the contact has been producing accurate intelligence, and the intelligence comes from the inside of the situation. He said, yes. She said, they won't receive that easily. He said, no, but accuracy is more useful than easy. She said, I know. She said, I've been correcting things for 2 years. I know what the reception looks like. He said, and you write it down and keep going. She said, always. He said, Izumi. She said, yes. He said, the organized response. She said, yes. He said, I can redirect again. The same mechanism as Wednesday, but in advance rather than reactive, aimed at disrupting the organization before it moves. She said, that would cost more than Wednesday. He said, yes. She said, the instability period, longer. He said, significantly. She said, I'm not asking you to do that. He said, I know you're not. She said, and you're considering it. He said, yes. She said, say why. He said, you know why. She said, say it anyway. He said, because the architecture is worth protecting, because the both things are both real, because 21 stars. She said, 24 now. He said, when did you add 3? She said, 30 seconds ago, while you were telling me about the organized response. He said, why then? She said, because you told me about the cost and the timeline and the organized response, and then you said I can redirect. In that sequence, the telling and then the offering. She said, the sequence is in the star entries. He said, 24. She said, yes. He said, and if I redirect? She said, more stars, but I'm not asking you to. He said, "What are you asking?" She said, "I'm asking you to let me handle the response through the Jujutsu world, and the hero world, and the accurate information pathway, not through you taking costs that compound the instability." He said, "You think that's sufficient?" She said, "I think it's the correct approach, the sustainable one. The redirection addresses the immediate threat, but the organized response will keep organizing as long as what I am to you is a target." He said, "And the alternative?" She said, "Accurate information distributed to the right people changes what I am from a target to something with institutional protection." He said, "You want to bring the Jujutsu world in?" She said, "I want to bring accurate information to the people who can act on it correctly, the Jujutsu world, the commission, and the specific individuals in both who can understand the full picture." He said, "The full picture includes the contacts?" She said, "Yes." He said, "And me as the source?" She said, "Yes." He said, "That's a significant disclosure." She said, "Yes, it is." He said, "You're certain?" She said, "I've been building toward this for 9 months. The data is sufficient. The foundation is accurate. The disclosure is the next wall of the architecture." He said, "Not the last wall." She said, "Not the last, there are more after this." He said, "You've mapped them." She said, "I have directions, not a complete map. The direction is clear." He said, "Tell me the direction." She said, "The correction of the foundational error, the accurate threat models, the cross-system framework that neither system currently has, the institutional architecture that can hold both systems without requiring them to pretend the other doesn't exist." He said, "That's ambitious." She said, "I have 35 notebooks." He said, "Yes." He said, "You do." She said, "The architecture is ambitious. The foundation is correct. Ambitious things built on correct foundations are achievable. Ambitious things built on wrong foundations are the 1987 Gakuganji paper." He said, "You're comparing yourself to the Gakuganji paper." She said, "I'm distinguishing myself from it." He said, "Yes." He said, "You are very much distinguishing yourself from it." Something in his tone. She noticed it immediately. 9 months of contact had calibrated her to the specific register of his communication, the way his tone carried information that the words didn't always carry explicitly. This tone was different from the analytical exchanges, different from the isolation entries, different from the protection entries. She said, "What is that?" He said, "What is what?" She said, "The tone, the way you said you are very much distinguishing yourself from it." He said, "It was an observation." She said, "It was something else." Long pause. He said, "You notice everything." She said, "I told you that on the first Thursday." He said, "Yes." She said, "Say what the tone was." He said, "It was the tone of someone who has been watching a specific thing for 9 months and has stopped being able to describe what they're watching in purely analytical terms." She was very still. She said, "Say it directly." He said, "You are the most. There is not adequate language in anything I have spoken across 1,000 years for what I am trying to say." She said, "Try." He said, "You are the most completely yourself of anything I have encountered, across all of it. The 1,000 years and the curses and the wars and the sealed periods and the dormancy. Everything I have seen has been some version of something organized around something else. Organized around power or fear or the wrong story or the reputation or the role." He said, "You are organized around accurate understanding, around the notebooks and the stars and the correct foundation and the both things architecture, around what is actually true." He said, "That is, there is no language, but the tone is what exists in the absence of adequate language." She put the pen down. She sat with what he had said. She said, 9 months. He said, "Yes." She said, "And you're telling me now?" He said, "You asked." She said, "Yes." He said, "I would not have said it without being asked." She said, "Why?" He said, "Because the saying changes things." She said, "Yes, it does." He said, "And you're not?" She said, "I'm noticing, before I feel things about it." He said, "And what are you noticing?" She said that the most significant entry in 35 notebooks is what you just said, and that I've been writing toward this entry for 9 months without knowing it was where I was writing toward. He said, "Where were you writing toward?" She said, "Here, this, the thing that doesn't have adequate language." He said, "And now that you're here?" She said, I'm writing it down. He said, even the things without adequate language. She said, especially those. The inadequate language is honest documentation of something real. Honest documentation of something real is the most important category. He said, you're writing about this in the star entries. She said, I'm writing about this specifically. He said, how many stars? She said, I haven't decided yet. I need to think about how many is right for the thing without adequate language. He said, take your time. She wrote for a while. He waited. She said, 7. He said, why 7? She said, because 7 is specific, not the round numbers. 7 means I counted carefully and arrived here. He said, 24 plus 7. She said, 31 stars total. He said, that's a significant number. She said, yes, it is. He said, what's the record across all the notebooks? She said, this is the record. He said, you've never had 31 stars in one set of entries. She said, no. He said, because nothing before this required them. She said, yes. He was quiet. She was quiet. The contact held the specific quality of a silence that was not empty, the full silence, the kind that had its own weight and texture, and which she had learned to recognize as the most honest form of communication, available to something that had existed for 1,000 years and still occasionally ran out of adequate language. She said, Sukuna. He said, yes. She said, the organized response. He said, yes. She said, when I take this to Aizawa and the Jujutsu world. He said, yes. She said, the disclosure is going to change the institutional picture significantly. He said, yes. She said, both systems are going to want to assess what the contact means, what I am, what you are to this situation. He said, yes. She said, the assessment is going to be complicated. He said, yes. She said, and I'm going to navigate it. He said, I know. She said, because I write things down and keep going. He said, always. She said, and while I'm navigating it. He said, I'll be here. She said, Thursday. He said, Thursday, yes. She said, even with the instability risk. He said, the contact resolves the instability. Thursday is the resolution. She said, so Thursday is also doing something for the seal condition. He said, yes. She said, you didn't tell me that. He said, it seemed like information that would change the exchange. She said, how? He said, you would feel responsible for maintaining the contact for my sake, rather than because the contact is what it is. She said, and you didn't want that. He said, I wanted the contact to be what it is, not what it does for the seal. She said, so you withheld accurate information. He said, yes. She said, that's the first time. He said, yes. She said, why are you telling me now? He said, because you're about to take significant risk for the disclosure, and you should have accurate information about everything. She said, including the fact that the contact stabilizes your seal. He said, yes. She said, so the exchange runs both directions in more ways than I knew. He said, yes. She wrote. He said, what are you writing? She said that the exchange stabilizes the seal condition, and that you withheld this for 9 months because you didn't want it to change what the exchange was, and that you're telling me now because I'm about to take a risk, and you want me to have accurate information. She said, and that all 3 of those things are in the star entries. He said, how many? She said, 3 more, 34 total. He said, for the seal thing. She said, for the seal thing and the reason you withheld it, and the reason you're telling me now. He said, 1 star per thing. She said, yes. He said, you're very precise about the stars. She said, the stars have to be accurate. Inflated stars mean nothing. Stars that are earned mean everything. He said, 34 earned. She said, 34 earned, yes. He said, Izumi. She said, yes. He said, the disclosure. She said, yes. He said, what do you need from me for it? She said, the Chapter 7 correction. Everything I've documented about the cross-system mechanics, the accumulation theory update, the threat model corrections. She said, and permission to disclose the contact. He said, "You're asking my permission." She said, "The contact involves both of us. Accurate disclosure requires both of us to agree to it." He said, "You've been operating on this assumption for 9 months." She said, "Yes." He said, "You never disclosed without asking." She said, "No, it's not mine to disclose alone." He said, "You've had significant intelligence for 9 months that would have changed the institutional picture significantly, and you waited for this conversation." She said, "Yes." He said, "Why?" She said, "Because the disclosure changes what the exchange is, and the exchange is 34 stars. You don't change 34 stars without the conversation first." He was very quiet. The long quiet, the one with the most content. He said, "You have permission." She said, "Yes." He said, "Disclose everything, the contact, the exchange, the mechanics, the timeline, all of it." She said, "Including the Wednesday event." He said, "Including Wednesday, yes." She said, "They're going to have significant institutional responses." He said, "I know." She said, "Both systems." He said, "Yes." She said, "And you're agreeing anyway." He said, "The architecture requires it. You said the disclosure is the next wall, the wall goes up." She said, "Even with the institutional responses." He said, "Even with, yes." She said, "Why?" He said, "Because the exchange runs both directions and accurate understanding runs both directions, and what we're building runs both directions, and all of that is better served by the full picture being available to the right people." She said, "The right people." He said, "Aizawa, the jujutsu contacts you have, the people on your load-bearing list." She said, "You know about the load-bearing list." He said, "You mentioned it in month 4. She said, "You remembered." He said, "I remember everything, 1,000 years of everything. Your month 4 mentions are in there." She said, "That's either extraordinary or overwhelming." He said, "Both, the both things architecture." She said, "Yes." She almost smiled. He felt it in the contact frequency. He said, "The almost smile." She said, "Yes." He said, "Getting closer to the actual one." She said, "Yes." He said, "When?" She said, "I don't know, when it's ready." He said, "The pen speed question." She said, "Yes, when it feels like something I want rather than something that needs the careful approach." He said, "And now?" She said, "Somewhere between." He said, "Closer than last time." She said, "Yes, closer than last time." He said, "I'll wait." She said, "I know." He said, "I've been waiting for adequate language for 500 years. The smile is faster than that." She said, "Yes." She said, "It is." She wrote in notebook 35. She wrote, "He's been waiting for 500 years, and he said the smile is faster than that." That's in the star entries. She drew 3 stars. 37. She looked at 37. She said, "That's right." Aizawa's face when she told him was the most complete expression she had ever documented on it. Not the Aizawa expression, not the professional assessment face or the not talking about that face. The face underneath those, the one that appeared when something arrived that exceeded the existing framework and the existing framework had to expand on the spot. She sat across from him. She said, "I've been in contact with Ryomen Sukuna for 9 months." He said, "The king of curses." She said, "Yes." He said, "Who is sealed?" She said, "Partially. The seal has a specific integrity range, and the contact operates through the frequency of 1 for all's accumulated will. The mechanics are in notebook 31. She put the notebook on the desk. He looked at it. He said, "Midoriya." She said, "Yes." He said, "How long have you been sitting on this?" She said, 9 months. The contact developed gradually. I documented everything. I waited for the disclosure to be the right next step. He said, "And now it's the right next step." She said, "Yes, the cursed world is organizing a collective response to an event that occurred 3 weeks ago. The response is aimed at disrupting the contact. The timeline is weeks, not months." He said, "The event 3 weeks ago." She said, "Wednesday, the training ground. A special grade cursed spirit was removed. The source of the removal was the contact." He said, "Sukuna." She said, "Yes." He said he removed a special grade cursed spirit from within UA's training ground. She said, yes. He said, to protect you. She said, yes. He said, from within the seal. She said, partially breached, temporarily, the seal restabilized. He looked at the notebook. He said, this is notebook 31. She said, yes. He said, how many notebooks? She said, 37 currently. 31 through 37 are specifically about the cross-system mechanics and the contact development. The earlier ones have foundational analysis that supports the framework. He said, 37 notebooks. She said, I work fast when the subject is significant. He said, and the subject is significant. She said, the most significant discovery in 37 notebooks. Yes. He said, what do you need from me? She said, the Jujutsu connection. I know there's an institutional relationship between the Commission and the Jujutsu world. It's not publicized. It's the channel that exists for things that cross the systems. He said, you know about that channel. She said, I found the 1990s collaboration documentation. Yes. He said, of course you did. She said, I need that channel. The disclosure needs to reach the right people in the Jujutsu world simultaneously with the Commission's institutional response. If one side gets it before the other, the framing gets ahead of the accuracy. He said, you've thought about the institutional response dynamics. She said, Notebook 34, the section on disclosure strategy. He said, you have a disclosure strategy notebook. She said, I have a section. The notebook is about broader architecture. The disclosure strategy is pages 40 through 57. He said, I don't know whether to be concerned or impressed. She said, probably both. The both things architecture is correct for most things. He said, Midoriya. She said, yes. He said, is the contact safe? She said, define safe. He said, for you. She said, the contact has not produced harm to me in 9 months of operation. The Wednesday event produced the opposite of harm. The threat comes from the cursed world's response to the contact, not from the contact itself. He said, and the source of the contact? She said, is not a threat to me. He said, you're certain? She said, 37 notebooks certain, yes. He looked at her. He said, you trust it? She said, I trust him. He said, him. She said, the entity before the reputation, yes. He was quiet. He said, I'm going to make a phone call. She said, the channel. He said, yes. He said, go to class. She said, yes. She stood. She said, Aizawa. He said, yes. She said, thank you. He said, don't thank me yet. The institutional responses are going to be significant. She said, I know, I have a section. He said, pages 40 through 57. She said, yes. He said, go to class. She went to class. She wrote for the entire afternoon. The Jujutsu world's response came through a woman named Shoko Iiri, who arrived at UA on a Wednesday, and had the specific quality of someone who had been in complicated situations long enough to have stopped performing uncomplicated. She sat across from Izumi in a room that Aizawa had cleared. She said, you've been in contact with Sukuna. Izumi said, yes. She said, the king of curses. Izumi said, yes. She said, and you have documentation. Izumi said, notebooks 31 through 37, and supporting analysis from notebooks 28 through 30. She put them on the table. Shoko looked at the notebooks. She said, how many total? Izumi said, 37. She said, about Sukuna. Izumi said, about the cross-system mechanics and the contact development. The broader notebooks have foundational analysis that supports the framework, but the Sukuna-specific documentation is the last 7. Shoko said, and you've been developing this for 9 months. Izumi said, the analytical framework started before the contact. Notebook 31 is where the prediction became data. Shoko said, and the contact itself. Izumi said, 9 months, yes. Shoko opened notebook 31. She read. She was a doctor and a jujutsu sorcerer, and someone who had spent her career in the space where things that shouldn't happen kept happening, and had developed the specific quality of reading things carefully rather than reacting to them. She read for a long time. She said the chapter 7 errors. Izumi said 3 structural errors and 1 foundational assumption error. The 1987 Gakuganji paper is the source. Everything built on it carries the error. Shoko said you identified this independently. Izumi said through analytical reasoning applied to the text. No jujutsu training. Shoko said and Sukuna confirmed the errors. Izumi said he's had opinions about chapter 7 for 4 years. His analysis and mine match. Shoko said the King of Curses and a UA first year arrived at the same analytical conclusions about jujutsu theory independently. Izumi said we started from different positions. The conclusions converged. Shoko said that's either evidence of the accuracy of the conclusions or evidence of something else. Izumi said the two are not mutually exclusive. Shoko looked at her. She said no, they're not. She went back to the notebooks. She said the Wednesday event. Izumi said yes. She said the special grade removal. Izumi said yes. She said the energy signature we picked up was significant. We couldn't identify the source. Izumi said the source is in notebook 34, section 3. Shoko found it. She read. She said he partially breached the seal. Izumi said yes. She said to remove a threat to you. Izumi said yes. Shoko was quiet. She said that's not behavior that's in any documentation about Sukuna. Izumi said no, it's the first recorded instance. Shoko said first in 1,000 years. Izumi said yes. Shoko said and your analysis says this is because. Izumi said notebook 33, the entity before the reputation section. Shoko found it. She read that section more slowly than the others. She said, you wrote that wanting to be correctly understood is the most human thing you'd heard from something positioned as the opposite of human. Izumi said, yes. Shoko said, and you believe that? Izumi said, I documented it over 9 months. Yes, I believe it. Shoko said, the jujutsu world is going to struggle with this. Izumi said, I know. The institutional frameworks are built on the wrong threat model. Correcting the threat model requires accepting that the foundational assumptions were wrong. Shoko said, which requires accepting that a lot of things built on those assumptions were also wrong. Izumi said, yes. Shoko said, that's not easy for institutions. Izumi said, institutions don't like having their foundational assumptions corrected. I've been doing it for 2 years. Shoko said, in the hero world. Izumi said, yes. Shoko said, and now you're doing it in the jujutsu world. Izumi said, and in the overlap, the part neither system looks at. Shoko said, the part where you've been for 9 months. Izumi said, yes. Shoko closed the notebooks. She looked at all 7 of them. She said, the organized response from the cursed world. Izumi said, weeks not months, the organization is active now. Shoko said, and your assessment of what the response requires from us. Izumi said, coordinated positioning across both systems. The jujutsu world has the framework for cursed spirit response at this scale. The hero system has the infrastructure for large-scale coordination. Neither has the cross-system framework that this requires. Shoko said, but you do. Izumi said, I have the beginning of it. Notebook 35, the architecture section. She pushed notebook 35 across the table. Shoko opened it. She read the architecture section. She said, you're proposing a joint response framework. Izumi said, yes. She said, built on the corrected threat models. Izumi said, yes. She said, with you as the architect. Izumi said, with accurate information as the architect, I'm documenting it. The implementation requires both systems. Shoko looked at her. She said, how old are you? Izumi said, 17. Shoko said, you're 17 years old. Izumi said, yes. Shoko said, and you've been building a cross-system response framework for cursed spirit threats while attending hero school. Izumi said, I have 37 notebooks. The work accumulates. Shoko said, yes. Shoko said, "It does." She closed notebook 35. She said, "I'll take this to Gojo." Izumi said, "Satoru Gojo." Shoko said, "Yes." Izumi said, "He's going to have significant reactions to the Chapter 7 corrections." Shoko said, "He's going to have significant reactions to all of this." Izumi said, "The institutional responses are, I have a section." Shoko said, "In which notebook?" Izumi said, 34, pages 40 through 57. Shoko almost smiled. Izumi noticed. She wrote it down. Shoko said, "You just wrote that I almost smiled." Izumi said, "The almost smiles go in the record." Shoko said, "Why?" Izumi said, "Because they matter. The almost is the real one happening before it's ready. That's worth documenting." Shoko looked at her for a long moment. She said, "Midoriya." Izumi said, "Yes." She said, "The contact, 9 months of it." Izumi said, "Yes." She said, "What is it?" Izumi said, "The exchange, the architecture, the both things held simultaneously, the correct foundation and the building from it." She said, "And?" Izumi said, "And 37 notebooks and counting." Shoko said, "And?" Izumi said, "And some things are worth being certain about." Shoko said, "And this is one of them." Izumi said, "Yes." Shoko picked up the 7 notebooks. She stood. She said, "I'll be in contact." She said, "Midoriya." Izumi said, "Yes." She said, "The entity before the reputation section, in notebook 33." Izumi said, "Yes." She said, "It's the most important section in 7 notebooks." Izumi said, "I know." She said, "I've been in the Jujutsu world for 20 years. Nobody has written that section before." Izumi said, "Most people start with the reputation." Shoko said, "Yes." She said, "You started with Chapter 7. Izumi said, "Yes." She said, "That's why it's 37 notebooks." Izumi said, "Yes." Shoko left. Izumi sat in the empty room. She wrote. The last line she wrote that day was, "The disclosure is done, the wall is up, the architecture continues." She drew 3 stars. 40 stars total. She looked at 40. She wrote 40 earned, every one. The Thursday contact after the disclosure was different. Not the frequency, not the cellular awareness or the scale difference or the quality of the contact itself. The contact was what it always was. What was different was what she carried into it. She said, "It's done." He said, "The disclosure." She said, "Yes, Aizawa and the Jujutsu World contact. A doctor named Shoko Iiri who is taking the notebooks to Satoru Gojo." He said, "Gojo." She said, "Yes." He said, "His response is going to be." She said, "I have a section." He said, "Of course you do." She said, "The institutional responses are moving. The cross-system positioning for the organized cursed response is beginning. The architecture we built is being implemented." He said, "By the right people." She said, "By people who have accurate information." Yes. He said, "The wall is up." She said, "Yes." He was quiet. She said, "And?" He said, "And the instability resolved 3 minutes ago when the contact opened." She said, "The contact resolves it." He said, "Yes." She said, "Every Thursday." He said, "Yes." She said, "That's in the record." He said, "Which notebook?" She said, 38, I started it this morning." He said, 38 notebooks. She said, "The work accumulates." He said, "Yes." He said, "It does." She wrote. He said, "What are you writing?" She said that the wall is up and the architecture is being implemented and the instability resolved and we're here, both of us. She said, "And that 40 stars is the current count." He said, 40. She said, "Yes." He said, "What's the newest 3? She said that the disclosure is done, that the wall is up, that we're both here after it. He said, "You added stars for us being here after it." She said, "Yes." He said, "Why specifically?" She said, "Because things that are real survive the complicated. The The disclosure was complicated. The institutional responses are complicated. The organized cursed response is complicated. She said, and we're here, both of us, after the complicated. He said, yes. He said, we are. She said, that's worth 3 stars. He said, yes. He said, it is. She looked at the 40 stars. She said, the almost smile. He said, yes. She said, I think it's ready. He was quiet. He said, the pen speed. She said, yes, it feels like something I want, not something that needs the careful approach. The wanting is there. He said, is Yumi? She said, yes. She smiled. Not the almost, the actual one. The specific version that happened when something was exactly what it was and didn't need to be more than that. She sat in the library at midnight with notebook 38 and 40 stars and the contact open and the smile on her face. She wrote the smile, not the almost, the actual one. She drew 3 stars. 43. She looked at 43. She said internally, is that right? One for all 8 of them, warm and layered and paying attention since the beginning, said yes. He said across the frequency, across the seal, across the distance and the 1,000 years and the wrong threat models and the chapter 7 errors and the both things architecture and the 9 months of Thursdays. I can feel that. She said, you can feel the smile through the contact. He said, yes. She said, that goes in the record. He said, which star? She said, the 44th. She drew it. She looked at 44. She wrote 44 earned, every one of them earned. She wrote the architecture continues. She wrote the exchange continues. She wrote Thursday continues. She looked at the 3 lines. She kept all 3. She looked at the library around her. The same library where she had been arguing with a textbook on a Tuesday afternoon 9 months ago. The same midnight quality. The same pen and the same notebooks, and the same person who noticed things before she felt them about them. Different in all the ways that mattered. She wrote, 9 months ago I found the error in chapter 7. The analysis was correct. The foundation was correct. The architecture followed from the correct foundation. She wrote, what I didn't know was what the architecture was going to build. She wrote, now I do. She wrote, it built this. The exchange and the 38 notebooks and the Thursday contacts and the 44 stars and the actual smile and the both things held simultaneously and the correct foundation and the building from it. She wrote, it built exactly what it was supposed to build. She looked at that. She wrote, that's the whole entry, that's everything. She drew 1 more star. 45. She looked at 45. She said, yes. She said, that's right. She closed notebook 38. She sat in the library. The contact was still open. The warm layered one for all presents and the frequency of the exchange and the 45 stars and the actual smile and the 1,000-year-old awareness on the other side of the seal that had found the right size. She was exactly where she was. She was in exactly the right place. She began notebook 39. And that is the complete story. Of Ryumen Sukuna, who watched a girl argue with a textbook and came back on Thursday and led with chapter 7 and felt isolating things for 500 years without saying them and said them and counted stars to 45 and found the right size. Of Izumi Midoriya, who noticed before she felt and felt anyway and wrote it down and kept going and built the architecture on the correct foundation and smiled the actual smile. Of the exchange that ran both directions. Of the both things held simultaneously. Of 45 earned stars. Of Thursday. Every Thursday. No cap, this is the most honest and complete story we have ever told. And 39 notebooks are going to prove it. Every single one. If you made it to the very end of this complete story, you are absolutely Fiction Flux family, and we see you completely. Please subscribe and hit that like button and share this video with every anime fan you know, because every single share helps us grow and reach more people who love these stories. It genuinely means everything. Drop in the comments what story you want next, because we make these for you. See you in the next one.